Captain Lee Tae-ho stood at the observation deck of Harmony's Edge Station and watched the massive warship approach through the darkness of space. The ship was bigger than anything he had ever seen, painted in dark red and black colors that seemed to eat the light from nearby stars. Sharp metal spikes covered its hull like the teeth of some ancient beast, and weapons jutted out from every surface. Even from this distance, the ship looked ready to destroy everything in its path. "Sir, all security teams are on high alert," said his communication officer through the intercom. "The other species are requesting immediate evacuation protocols." Lee Tae-ho pressed his hand against the cool metal wall and felt the station shake, slightly as the giant ship moved closer. Harmony's Edge was supposed to be neutral territory where all species could meet safely, but everyone knew that meant nothing to the Kethmori. They were the most feared species in the known galaxy, and they had never bothered with diplomacy or peace talks. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed what they did not need. Dr. Park So-jin hurried into the observation area, her research tablet clutched tightly in her hands. Her usually neat hair was messy from running, and her eyes were wide, with a mixture of fear and scientific curiosity. "Tae-ho, the sensor readings are incredible," she said breathlessly. "That ship is carrying live Kethmori, not just weapons. The biosignatures are off the charts." "How many?" Lee Tae-ho asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. "At least 300 adult warriors, maybe more," Park So-jin replied, checking her tablet again. "But there's something strange about the readings. There are smaller life signs, too, much smaller. I think they have young ones aboard." Ambassador Kang Ji-woo entered the observation deck with quick, nervous steps. His diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed as always, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the station's cool temperature. "Captain, I've received an official communication from the Kethmori vessel," he said, in a voice that tried to sound calm but failed. "They're requesting a meeting." Lee Tae-ho turned away from the viewport to stare at the ambassador. "A meeting? The Kethmori don't request meetings. They issue demands or they attack." "I know," Kang Ji-woo said, wiping his forehead with a small cloth. "That's what makes this so unusual. The message specifically requested human representatives only. No other species are to be present." The three humans looked at each other in silence for a moment. Throughout the galaxy, the Kethmori were known as 8-foot-tall reptilian warriors with natural armor plating that could stop most weapons. Their claws contained venom that could kill most species in minutes, and their culture was built entirely around conquest and strength. They had never been defeated in battle, and they had never shown interest in peaceful contact with any other species. "What do you think they want?" Park So-jin asked quietly. "Nothing good," Lee Tae-ho replied. "But we can't refuse a direct request. On a neutral station. It would violate every diplomatic protocol we have." The captain activated his communicator and spoke to the station's control center. "This is Captain Lee. Clear docking bay 7 for the Kethmori vessel. Set up a meeting room in the diplomatic section, and make sure all non-human species are moved to the far side of the station." "Sir, are you sure about this?" came the worried voice of the station commander. "We could contact the Terran fleet for backup." "No," Lee Tae-ho said firmly. "If they wanted to destroy us, that ship could turn this entire station into space dust in seconds. If they're talking instead of shooting, we need to listen." 2 hours later, the three humans sat in the neutral meeting room waiting. The room was designed to accommodate many different species, with adjustable gravity, atmosphere controls, and furniture that could change shape as needed. Lee Tae-ho had ordered human standard settings, hoping it would not offend their dangerous visitors. The door opened with a soft hiss, and High Commander Vextar entered the room. He was even more intimidating in person than the humans had expected. His dark green scales reflected the room's lights like polished metal, and his yellow eyes seemed to see everything at once. Scars covered his arms and face, telling stories of countless battles. When he moved, his claws clicked against the floor like knives on stone. Behind him came 2 other Kethmori warriors, slightly smaller but no less dangerous looking. They positioned themselves on either side of the door like living statues, their hands resting near their weapons, but not quite touching them. "Humans," Vextar said, in a voice that sounded like grinding rocks. His translator device turned his native language into basic galactic standard, but it could not hide the power behind his words. I am High Commander Vextar of the Keth Mori Warfleet. You will listen to what I say. Lee Tae-ho stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from any weapons. High Commander, I am Captain Lee Tae-ho of the Terran Defense Force. This is Dr. Park So-jin, our xenobiologist, and Ambassador Kang Ji-woo, our diplomatic representative. We are honored by your presence. Vextar's eyes narrowed slightly at the formal greeting, as if he was not used to such politeness. He remained standing, towering over the seated humans like a mountain of muscle and scales. I have come here because my people face a problem that our strength cannot solve. This shames me greatly, but I must put the survival of my species above my pride. The humans exchanged quick glances. A Keth Mori, admitting weakness, was like a star suddenly deciding to stop shining. It simply did not happen. What kind of problem? Park So-jin asked carefully. Vextar was quiet for a long moment, and the humans could see him struggling with words he had probably never spoken before. Our young are dying, he finally said, not from disease or injury, but from their own nature. They have become too dangerous for us to control, and we are losing more scion each breeding cycle. Scion? Kang Ji-woo asked. Our young, one of the other Keth Mori explained. Your language has no proper word for them, Vextar continued, his voice becoming heavier with each word. In the old times, our scion were fierce but manageable. The strong survived, the weak were culled, and our species grew stronger. But in recent generations, something has changed. The young have become savage beyond reason. They cannot be taught, cannot be controlled, cannot even be kept alive long enough to reach maturity. Park So-jin leaned forward slightly, her scientific mind immediately engaging with the problem. What do you mean by too dangerous to control? They attack everything, including their caretakers, Vextar said bluntly. Adult Keth Mori who have survived 100 battles are being killed by younglings barely old enough to walk. Our nursery worlds have become death zones. If this continues, our species will end not from external enemies but from our own children. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Lee Tae-ho tried to process what he was hearing. The most dangerous species in the galaxy was being destroyed by their own young, and they were asking humans for help. With respect, High Commander, Lee Tae-ho said slowly. What does this have to do with us? We know very little about Keth Mori biology or child-rearing practices. Vextar's scarred face showed something that might have been desperate hope. We have observed your species for many cycles. You are weak in body but strong in mind. You raise your young differently than any other species we have encountered. Your children are born helpless, yet they do not kill each other or their caretakers. They grow to be intelligent and loyal. You want us to study your young? Park So-jin asked. More than study, Vextar replied. We want you to care for them, to raise them as you would raise your own, to teach them what we cannot teach them ourselves. The humans stared at the massive warrior in shock. The idea was so unexpected, so unprecedented that none of them could find words to respond. This request goes against every tradition of my people, Vextar continued. Many will call me a fool or a traitor for asking aliens to touch our scion, but I have seen what happens when we continue on our current path. My own offspring was among the casualties last season. I will do anything to prevent other parents from suffering the same loss. Ambassador Kang Ji-woo finally found his voice. High Commander, this is a very unusual request. We would need to consult with our government, study the situation thoroughly, and... There is no time for lengthy consultations, Vextar interrupted. Every day we delay, more scion die. I am prepared to offer compensation beyond your imagination, resources, technology, protection for your colonies. Whatever you require. Lee Tae-ho looked at his companions and saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. This could be the most important moment in human history. Or it could be a trap that would destroy them all. But if it was real, if the most feared species in the galaxy was truly asking for their help, it could change everything. We will need to see the situation for ourselves, Lee Tae-ho said finally. If you're serious about this request, we'll Need access to your caretaking facilities and complete medical data. Vextar nodded slowly. Agreed. But know this, humans. If you accept this task and fail, if any harm comes to our scion through your actions, I will personally hunt down every member of your species in the galaxy. Understood, Li Teho replied, meeting the commander's fierce gaze without flinching. The journey to the Keth Mori homeworld took 3 days in their fastest ship, and during that time, Dr. Park So-jin could not stop thinking about what they might find. She sat in the small human quarters aboard the Keth Mori vessel, surrounded by data tablets and research notes, trying to prepare for something that no human had ever experienced before. The ship itself was a marvel of brutal efficiency, with sharp angles and dark metal corridors that seemed designed to intimidate rather than comfort. Engineer Kim Dong-hyun worked quietly in the corner, checking and rechecking his protective equipment designs. He had spent the entire trip modifying human safety gear to handle unknown threats, adding extra armor plating and emergency medical systems. His hands moved with practiced precision, but Park So-jin could see the worry in his eyes. Dr. Yoon Mi-rae paced the small space like a caged animal, her mind racing through every child psychology theory she had ever learned. Nothing in my training prepared me for this, she muttered for the 10th time that day. Human children can be difficult, but at least they don't try to kill their caretakers. Maybe they do, and we just don't realize it yet, Kim Dong-hyun said, with dark humor, testing a new helmet design. Maybe this is why humans evolved to have such long childhoods. Our young are just better at hiding their murderous intentions. Park So-jin looked up from her research. That's actually not far from the truth. Human infants are born completely helpless compared to most species. We have to care for them for years before they can survive on their own. Maybe that forced us to develop stronger parental instincts. The ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace, and through the small viewport, they could see their destination. The Keth Mori homeworld was a massive planet covered in red deserts and dark mountain ranges. Even from orbit, it looked hostile and unforgiving, like a world that would kill anything weak enough to let it. Sub-Commander Renthak entered their quarters without knocking, a habit that had made all the humans nervous during the journey. He was smaller than High Commander Vextar, but no less dangerous, with fresh scars across his face and arms that suggested recent battles. "We approach the primary nursery world," he announced in his grinding voice. "Prepare yourselves for what you will see." "Is it really that bad?" Yoon Mi-rae asked. Renthak's yellow eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her step back. "Worse than your soft minds can imagine. In the past cycle alone, we have lost 60% of our scion and 40% of our caretakers. The survivors are damaged beyond repair. The landing process was rough and violent, as if the ship was falling rather than flying." Kim Dong-hyun grabbed his equipment bags and made sure everything was secured, while the 2 doctors held onto their seats and tried not to think about what would happen if the Keth Mori pilot made a mistake. When they finally stepped off the ship onto the planet's surface, the heat hit them like a physical blow. The air was thick and dry, filled with the smell of metal and something else that Park So-jin could not identify. In the distance, she could see the nursery complex, a series of low, bunker-like buildings connected by covered walkways. The atmosphere is breathable for humans, but barely, Renthak explained as he led them toward the complex. "Your equipment will help, but do not remove your protective gear for any reason. Keth Mori young can detect weakness through scent, and they will attack anything they perceive as prey." As they walked, Park So-jin noticed that the ground around the nursery was scarred with what looked like blast marks and deep gouges. "What happened here?" she asked. "Last month's feeding incident," Renthak replied without emotion. 17. Scion died along with 3 adult caretakers. We had to use heavy weapons to restore order. The humans exchanged horrified looks. The idea of using military weapons against children was beyond anything they could understand. But Renthak spoke about it as if it was normal procedure. The first building they entered was the observation center, where Keth Mori scientists monitored the young through thick armored glass. The scientists barely looked up when the humans arrived, their attention focused on screens showing different areas of the nursery complex. "Show them the primary nursery. Renthak ordered. One of the scientists activated a large display screen, and the humans found themselves looking into what could only be described as a war zone. The room beyond the glass was large and mostly empty, with scattered pieces of broken furniture and dark stains on the walls and floor. In the center of the space, a group of young Kethmori circled each other like wild animals. The Scion were about the size of human teenagers, but they moved, with a deadly grace that no human child possessed. Their scales were lighter than those of adults, more green than black, and their claws were already sharp enough to cut through metal. As the humans watched, two of the young suddenly erupted into violence, tearing at each other with savage fury, while the others watched and waited for their chance to join the fight. "Dear God," Yunmire whispered. "They're just children." "No," Renthak corrected firmly. "They are Scion. They have never been children, as you understand the word. They are born with the instincts of apex predators and none of the emotional controls that allow civilized behavior." Park So-jin forced herself to keep watching as the fight continued. One of the young Kethmori managed to pin his opponent and was preparing to deliver a killing blow when an adult caretaker entered the room. The caretaker was fully armored and carried an electric prod that sparked with dangerous energy. "Separate! Now!" the caretaker commanded, moving between the fighting Scion. For a moment, it looked like the young would obey. Then, with coordinated precision that spoke of pack-hunting instincts, all 6 Scion turned on the adult caretaker. The attack was so fast and vicious that even through the protective glass, the humans could hear the sound of claws on armor. The caretaker fought back with skill and experience, using the electric prod to drive the young away, but Park So-jin could see that he was being overwhelmed. More adult Kethmori rushed into the room, and soon the space was filled with the sounds of combat as adults fought to control their own children. "Turn it off," Kim Dong-hyun said quietly. "Please, turn it off." The screen went dark, but the sounds of fighting continued to echo through the building. Park So-jin realized that what they had just seen was not an unusual incident, but a normal day in a Kethmori nursery. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "The violence has always been part of our nature," Renthak replied. "But in recent generations, it has become worse. The Scion are stronger, faster, and more aggressive than ever before. We believe it may be connected to environmental changes on our worlds, or perhaps genetic drift from too many cycles of selecting only the most violent survivors." Dr. Yunmire stared at the blank screen with tears in her eyes. "Those poor children. They don't understand what they're doing. They're acting on pure instinct with no emotional guidance." "That is why we need you," Renthak said. "Adult Kethmori cannot provide emotional guidance because we do not possess it ourselves. We have tried using robots and artificial intelligences, but the Scion destroy them immediately. They respond only to living beings, and most living beings cannot survive contact with them." Park So-jin was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. "You said you've observed human child-rearing practices. What specifically interested you about our methods?" Renthek led them to another observation room, this one showing archived footage of human families. The images had clearly been taken secretly, probably from Kethmori surveillance of human colonies. They showed human parents interacting with their children in ways that seemed completely alien to Kethmori understanding. "Your young are born weak and helpless, yet they do not try to kill each other," Renthak said, pointing to a scene of human toddlers playing together. "When they become upset or angry, their caretakers do not use violence to control them. Instead, they use something we do not understand, something that calms the young without triggering their fear or aggression responses." "Emotional regulation," Yoon Mi-rae said softly. "We teach children how to manage their feelings, how to express emotions safely, how to form bonds with others. It's not something we consciously think about. It's just what we do. And it works," Renthak continued. "Your children grow to become adults who can cooperate, who can control their violent impulses, who can work together for common goals. This is what our Scion need to learn, but we cannot teach them because we do not understand it ourselves." Kim. Dong-hyun checked his equipment one more time and looked at his companions. "So the plan is to put humans in a room with homicidal alien children and hope our natural parenting instincts can somehow fix millions of years of evolutionary programming?" When you put it like that, it sounds completely insane, Park So-jin admitted. It is completely insane, Renthak agreed. But it is also our only hope. We have tried everything else. Military discipline, chemical restraints, surgical alterations, complete isolation. Nothing works. The Scion continue to kill and die until there are too few left to maintain our population. The sub-commander led them to a final observation room, this one showing what he called the memorial chambers. The screens displayed row after row of small alcoves, each containing the remains of young Keth Mori who had died in the E. Teacher Choi Hae-won arrived on the Keth Mori homeworld with 20 years of experience working with difficult children, but nothing had prepared her for the sound of claws scraping against metal that echoed through the nursery complex. She walked beside Dr. Yoon Mi-rae through the armored corridors, her teaching supplies feeling inadequate and almost foolish in her hands. Art materials and educational games seemed ridiculous when facing children who could kill with their bare hands. Medic Nam Woo-jin followed behind them, his medical kit expanded with emergency trauma supplies and several experimental sedatives. That might work on Keth Mori physiology. His usual calm confidence was shaken by the reports he had read during the journey. 3 caretakers died last week, he said quietly. All experienced warriors with decades of combat training. We're not warriors, Choi Hae-won replied, adjusting her protective gear. Maybe that's the point. They were being taken to meet their first test subject, a young Keth Mori called Storm Talon, who had already killed 3 adult caretakers in the past month. Engineer Kim Dong-hyun had spent days designing a special interaction chamber where humans could work with the Scion while maintaining some level of safety. The room had multiple exit points, emergency barriers that could drop instantly, and sensors that could detect aggressive behavior before it turned deadly. Remember, Dr. Yoon Mi-rae said as they approached the chamber, everything we know about child psychology might be wrong here. These aren't human children. Their brains are wired differently, their instincts are different, their entire evolutionary history is different. Sub-Commander Renthak stopped at the chamber entrance and turned to face the humans. His scarred face showed the strain of recent battles with the Scion. Storm Talon is 6 cycles old, which corresponds roughly to your 12 human years. He has been in isolation for 10 days since his last violent incident. Approach with extreme caution. Through the armored glass, they could see Storm Talon pacing in the center of the chamber like a caged predator. He was smaller than an adult Keth Mori, but already showed the deadly grace of his species. His green scales caught the light as he moved, and his yellow eyes tracked every movement outside his prison. When he noticed the humans watching him, he stopped pacing and stared directly at them with an intensity that made Choi Hae-won step back. He knows we're here, she whispered. He knows everything that happens in this facility, Renthak replied. Keth Mori senses are far superior to human senses. He can smell your fear, hear your heartbeat, detect the chemical changes in your body when you feel stress or excitement. Nam Woo-jin checked his medical sensors and frowned. His vital signs are incredibly high. Heart rate, brain activity, muscle, tension. He's like a spring wound too tight, ready to explode at any moment. Engineer Kim Dong-hyun activated the chamber's intercom system. All environmental controls are functioning normally. Atmosphere is human-compatible, temperature is stable, and all safety systems are armed. If anything goes wrong, the emergency barriers will deploy automatically. Choi Hae-won took a deep breath and looked at her companions. I'm going in. Absolutely not, Yoon Mi-rae said immediately. We need to observe him first, study his behavior patterns, develop a proper approach strategy. While we're studying and strategizing, he's getting worse, Choi Hae-won replied. Look at him. He's been in isolation for 10 days. That would drive any child crazy, human or otherwise. She was right. Storm Talon's pacing had become more frantic, and he had started making low growling sounds that seemed to come from deep in his chest. His claws left scratches on the metal floor with each step, and his tail lashed back and forth like a whip. If I'm going to work with him, I need to establish contact now, before he gets any more agitated, Choi Hae-won continued. Every moment we delay makes this harder. Nam Woo-jin activated his medical scanners and positioned himself near the emergency controls. At least let me monitor everything. If his aggression levels spike beyond safe parameters, you're coming. Out immediately. Renthak looked at the humans with something that might have been respect. No Keth Mori would voluntarily enter that chamber. Even our most experienced warriors require full battle armor and heavy weapons. We're not warriors, Choi Hae-won repeated. We're teachers. The chamber door opened with a soft hiss, and Choi Hae-won stepped inside. Storm Talon immediately stopped pacing and turned to face her, his body dropping into a predatory crouch. His eyes never left her as she slowly moved to a spot near the center of the room and sat down on the floor. For several minutes they simply looked at each other. Storm Talon remained crouched and ready to spring, while Choi Hae-won sat calmly with her hands visible and empty. She did not try to approach him or make any sudden movements. She just waited. "What is she doing?" Renthak asked through the intercom. "Establishing trust," Yun-Mi Ray replied, watching the interaction with fascination. "She's showing him that she's not a threat, that she's not trying to control or dominate him." Slowly, Storm Talon began to relax. His crouch became less aggressive, and his claws retracted slightly. He started to circle around Choi Hae-won, staying just out of reach but clearly curious about this strange new creature who smelled different from anything he had encountered before. "His vital signs are stabilizing," Nam Woo-jin reported. "Still elevated, but not in the danger zone." Choi Hae-won began to speak in a soft, calm voice. "Hello, Storm Talon. My name is Hae-won. I'm here to be your friend." She used the same tone she had used with thousands of human children over the years. Gentle but confident, warm but not overwhelming. Storm Talon stopped circling and tilted, his head clearly trying to process the sounds she was making. Keth Mori communication was very different from human speech, more focused on dominance displays and territorial warnings than on emotional expression. "That's it," Choi Hae-won continued. "You're trying to understand me, aren't you? I'm trying to understand you, too." Something remarkable happened. Storm Talon sat down. Not in a predatory crouch, but actually sat like a curious child might sit when listening to a story. His tail stopped lashing, and his breathing became slower and more regular. "Impossible," Renthak whispered. "No scion has ever shown calm behavior in the presence of a caretaker." Choi Hae-won reached slowly into her teaching bag and pulled out a simple toy, a small ball made of soft material that would not hurt anyone if thrown. Storm Talon's eyes immediately focused on the object, and she could see his hunting instincts activate. "This is a ball," she said, rolling it gently across the floor toward him. "It's for playing, not for fighting." Storm Talon pounced on the ball with lightning speed, grabbing it in his claws and preparing to tear it apart. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of destroying the toy, he looked at it more carefully, turning it over in his hands and examining its texture and weight. "He's playing," Yun-Mi Ray said in amazement. "Actually playing, not just destroying." For the next hour, Choi Hae-won worked with Storm Talon using simple games and activities designed for much younger human children. She showed him how to roll the ball back and forth, how to stack blocks without knocking them down, how to draw pictures with safe crayons on paper. Each activity was designed to teach basic concepts like cooperation, patience, and creative expression. Storm Talon was clearly struggling with these concepts. His instincts told him to dominate, to compete, to destroy anything that challenged him. But something about Choi Hae-won's presence seemed to calm those instincts. When he became frustrated with a particularly difficult task, instead of erupting into violence, he would look at her for guidance. "It's working," Nam Woo-jin reported. "His stress hormones are at the lowest levels we've ever recorded for a scion." The breakthrough came when another young Keth Mori was brought into the observation area. Iron Fang was Storm Talon's clutch sibling, equally dangerous and equally difficult to control. When Storm Talon saw Iron Fang through the glass, his immediate reaction was to prepare for battle. His body tensed, his claws extended, and he began making the low growling sounds that usually preceded violent attacks. But instead of attacking the glass or demanding to fight his sibling, Storm Talon did something that stunned everyone watching. He moved to stand between Choi Hae-won and the window, placing himself in a protective position. His posture was still aggressive, but it was directed outward, away from his human caretaker. "He's protecting her," Renthak said in a voice filled with disbelief. A scion is showing protective behavior toward an alien caretaker. The moment did not last long. Iron Fang's presence was too much of a trigger, and Storm Talon's instincts began to overwhelm his newfound calm. His breathing became rapid, his off movements more erratic, and Nam Wu Jin's sensors began showing dangerous spikes in his aggression levels. "Time to go," Nam Wu Jin announced, activating the emergency protocols. Choi Haiwan stood slowly and began moving toward the exit, speaking in the same calm voice she had used throughout the session. "I have to go now, Storm Talon, but I'll come back tomorrow. You did very well today." As she reached the door, Storm Talon made a sound unlike anything the Kethmori had ever heard from a scion. It was not a growl or a roar, but something softer, almost questioning. He was trying to call her back. "The session is over." War Master Grimthox stood before the assembled Kethmori War Council with barely controlled rage burning in his yellow eyes. His massive frame, covered in battle scars from 100 conflicts, dominated the chamber as he spoke in a voice that could shatter stone. "We have allowed aliens to corrupt our young with their weakness," he declared, his claws clicking against the metal table as he gestured. "This pollution of our bloodline must end before it spreads further." The council chamber erupted in angry voices as traditional Kethmori warriors voiced their agreement with Grimthox's words. These were the old guard, commanders who had built their reputations on conquest and domination, who saw the human presence as an insult to everything their species represented. High Commander Vextar remained seated at the head of the table, his scarred face showing no emotion despite the verbal assault on his decisions. "The humans have achieved in weeks what we could not accomplish in cycles," he said calmly. "Storm Talon has not killed a single caretaker since their arrival. He shows signs of emotional development that we thought impossible." "Emotional development," Grimthox spat the words like poison. "You speak of weakness as if it were strength. Our young are meant to be killers, not pets for alien creatures to coddle and corrupt." Dr. Lim Jae-hyuk, the human neurological researcher, who had arrived the previous week, looked up from his data tablets with concern. He had been studying brain scans of the scion under human care, and the results were unlike anything seen before in Kethmori research. "War Master, with respect, the changes we're seeing are not weakness. The young are developing neural pathways that allow them to control their aggression while maintaining their combat effectiveness." "Silence, alien!" Grimthox roared, turning his fury on the human scientist. "Your presence here is an abomination. Kethmori young should be raised by Kethmori, in the traditional ways that have served us for millennia." "The traditional ways are killing them," Vextar replied, his voice rising slightly. 60% casualties in the last breeding cycle, 40% among caretakers. How many more must die before you admit that our methods are failing?" Iron Fang had been the second scion assigned to human care, and his progress had been even more dramatic than Storm Talon's. Teacher Choi Haiwan had worked with him for only 2 weeks, but already he was showing signs of emotional attachment and protective behavior that no traditional Kethmori upbringing had ever produced. Captain Lee Tae-ho entered the council chamber with his security team, all of them wearing full protective gear. The tension in the room was so thick it could be cut with a blade, and he could see that the situation was approaching a dangerous breaking point. "High Commander, we need to discuss the security concerns that have been raised." "What security concerns?" Vextar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Intelligence reports suggest that some factions within your military are planning to take action against the human program," Lee Tae-ho said carefully. "We've intercepted communications about something called a purity cleansing operation." Grimthox stood to his full imposing height and fixed his deadly gaze on the human captain. "There are no security concerns for you to worry about, alien. Soon there will be no human presence here to threaten." The chamber fell silent except for the low humming of the facility's life support systems. Everyone present understood that Grimthox had just declared his intentions openly, abandoning any pretense of political maneuvering. "You would attack a peaceful research mission?" Vexatar asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I would cleanse our world of alien contamination," Grimthox replied without hesitation. "And any Kethmori who stand with the aliens will be cleansed as well." Dr. Lim Jae-hyuk quickly gathered his research materials and backed toward the exit. His studies had shown that the human-raised scion were developing something unprecedented, In Kethmori evolution, the ability to form emotional bonds while retaining their predatory capabilities. The neural pathways responsible for attachment and empathy, long suppressed in their species, were being reactivated through human interaction. The research data shows that these young will become superior warriors, he said desperately. They retain all their combat instincts, but gain the ability to work in teams, to form lasting alliances, to think strategically beyond immediate violence. Superior warriors do not need alien nursemaids, Grimthox snarled. They forge themselves, in blood and pain, as we have always done. The meeting ended with Vextar ordering increased security around the human research facility, while Grimthox stormed out with his supporters, clearly planning their next move. Lee Tae-ho immediately contacted his ship to request emergency evacuation. Protocols, but he knew that leaving now would doom the Scion who had been making such remarkable progress. 3 days later, the attack came at dawn. Grimthox led a force of 50 traditional warriors in an assault on the nursery complex, intending to eliminate the humans and return the Scion to conventional Kethmori training methods. The attackers expected to face only a few lightly armed researchers and perhaps some token resistance from Vextar's guards. They were not prepared for what actually happened. Teacher Choi Hae-won was conducting an early morning session with Storm Talon and Iron Fang when the alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Both young Kethmori immediately became agitated, their predatory instincts triggered by the sound of approaching danger. But instead of turning on their human caretaker, as traditional Scion would have done, they moved to protect her. "Stay behind. Us," Storm Talon said in his broken but improving galactic standard, positioning himself between Choi Hae-won and the chamber door. His words were the first clear communication he had ever managed, and they were spoken to protect an alien. Iron Fang took up position on the other side, his claws extended and his body ready for combat. But his aggression was directed outward, toward the threat, not inward toward his caretaker. Engineer Kim Dong-hyun frantically worked the facility's defensive systems from his control room, sealing blast doors and activating emergency barriers, but he could see on his sensors that Grimthox's forces were already inside the complex. "All human personnel, evacuate to the safe rooms immediately," he announced over the intercom. "What about the Scion?" Choi Hae-won asked through her communicator. "We can't leave them alone." "The Scion can take care of themselves," Kim Dong-hyun replied. "It's you I'm worried about." But as Grimthox's warriors breached the inner chambers, something unprecedented happened. The human-raised Scion did not scatter or hide as they had been trained to do. Instead, they formed defensive positions around their human caretakers and prepared to fight alongside them. Storm Talon and Iron Fang were joined by 3 other young Kethmori who had been part of the human program. Riverclaw, Mountain Strike, and Star Hunter all took up positions around Dr. Yoon Mi-rae and Medic Nam Woo-jin, creating a protective barrier of scales and claws. When the first traditional warriors burst into the chamber, they found themselves facing not cowering research subjects, but a coordinated defensive force of young Kethmori fighting to protect their alien caretakers. The battle was fierce and bloody. Grimthox's warriors were experienced and well-armed, but they had not expected to fight their own young, and they certainly had not expected those young to display tactical coordination and protective instincts. Storm Talon moved with deadly precision, using his smaller size and superior speed to outmaneuver the adult warriors. But more importantly, he fought with purpose beyond mere survival. Every attack he made was calculated to protect Choi Hae-won, every movement designed to keep the enemy away from his human caretaker. Iron Fang displayed even more remarkable behavior, actually using his body to shield Dr. Yoon Mi-rae from incoming weapons fire while coordinating attacks with his clutch siblings. The young Kethmori were fighting as a team, something that had never been seen before in their species' history. Captain Lee Tae-ho arrived with his security team in time to see the most extraordinary sight of his military career. Human researchers and Kethmori young fighting side by side, protecting each other with a loyalty that transcended species barriers. "This is impossible," one of Grimthox's warriors said as he watched Storm Talon deliberately take a wound meant for his human caretaker. "Scion do not sacrifice themselves for aliens." "These are no longer Scion," Grimthox roared in fury. "They have been corrupted beyond redemption. Kill them all." but the battle was already turning against the traditionalists. The human-raised young fought with intelligence and coordination that the attacking warriors could not match. They used the facility's layout to their advantage, set ambushes, and most importantly, they protected each other and their human caretakers with absolute determination. Dr. Lim Jae-hyuk, who had been monitoring the situation from a secure location, watched the neural activity readings from the young Kethmori during the battle. Incredible, he said to himself. They're showing brain patterns associated with loyalty, sacrifice, and group bonding. They're literally rewriting their own neural programming in real time. The fight ended when High Commander Vextar arrived with reinforcements loyal to his faction. Grimthox found himself surrounded and outnumbered, his traditional warriors beaten by children they had come to purify. 1 year later, Admiral Zhang Hyun-woo stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship Harmony and watched the most remarkable sight in recorded galactic history. Spread across the view screen before him was the combined human Kethmori fleet, preparing for their first joint military operation against the Void Swarm. Human vessels with their sleek lines and advanced technology flew in perfect formation alongside Kethmori warships with their brutal, spiked designs. "Admiral, we're receiving final coordination signals from all vessels," reported his communications officer. "Both human and Kethmori crews are reporting ready status." Zhang Hyun-woo nodded, still finding it difficult to believe that the galaxy's most feared predator species was now humanity's closest ally. The transformation had begun with a simple request for help with children and had evolved into something that would reshape the balance of power throughout known space. Counselor Bae Sunmi joined him on the bridge, carrying the formal documents that would make their alliance official. Her diplomatic career had been defined by this unprecedented partnership, and she had spent months negotiating the complex terms of what both species were calling the Youngward Pact. "The signing ceremony is scheduled for immediately after the operation," she said, checking her diplomatic schedule. "Representatives from 47 different species have requested permission to witness the event." On the main screen, they could see the flagship of the Kethmori fleet, now commanded by High Commander Vextar, who had taken the unprecedented title of Father-Friend of Humans. His ship was easily recognizable by the human crew quarters that had been added to its design, allowing for mixed crews that no one had thought possible just a year ago. The Void Swarm had been consuming star systems for months, their mechanical intelligence adapting to every conventional military strategy that had been deployed against them. Traditional tactics had failed because the swarm learned from each encounter, becoming stronger and more efficient with every battle. But the human-raised Kethmori had proposed something entirely new, a form of warfare that combined Kethmori, physical dominance with human strategic thinking and emotional intelligence. Instead of predictable military formations, they would use fluid, adaptive tactics that could change faster than the mechanical minds could analyze. Starhunter, now fully mature and serving as the first Kethmori to hold a command position in a mixed crew, stood beside Captain Lee Tae-ho on the bridge of their destroyer. His scales had darkened to the deep black of adult Kethmori, but his eyes still held the intelligence and loyalty that human care had developed in him. "Human Captain," Starhunter said in his now fluent galactic standard, "Kethmori boarding teams are ready for close-quarters combat. We will follow human tactical guidance as planned." Lee Tae-ho nodded, amazed at how naturally the partnership had developed. Starhunter retained all the deadly combat abilities of his species, but he had learned to channel that violence in precise, strategic ways rather than blind aggression. "Understood, Commander Starhunter. Remember, the key is coordination. The swarm expects either human tactics or Kethmori tactics, not both working together." Throughout the fleet, similar partnerships were in operation. Human tacticians worked alongside Kethmori warriors, each species contributing their unique strengths to create something greater than either could achieve alone. Dr. Park So-jin monitored the operation from the science vessel Discovery, where she continued her research into the remarkable transformation of Kethmori society. Her studies had revealed that the human-raised young were not just individual success stories, but the beginning of a fundamental evolution in their species. "The neural pathway development is unprecedented," she reported to her research team. Second-generation scion raised by the first generation are showing even more advanced emotional and cognitive abilities. The changes are becoming hereditary. Teacher Choi Hai-won, now director of the Human Kethmori Academy, worked from a specially designed facility where human caretakers trained to work with alien young, while Kethmori learned human child rearing techniques. The academy had become a model for interspecies cooperation that was being studied throughout the galaxy. Storm Talon is ready for his final evaluation, she reported to the academy board. Her first student had become the most successful example of the program, displaying intelligence, loyalty, and emotional stability that surpassed many adult Kethmori from traditional upbringings. Storm Talon himself was now serving as a cultural liaison, helping other young Kethmori adapt to human care while teaching humans about the specific needs of his species. His transformation from a dangerous, uncontrollable scion to a respected leader had become the symbol of what was possible when different species worked together. The battle against the Void Swarm began with conventional tactics, allowing the mechanical intelligence to analyze and begin adapting to standard human and Kethmori strategies. But as the engagement progressed, the mixed crews began implementing their revolutionary approach. Human commanders provided strategic oversight and tactical coordination, while Kethmori warriors executed complex maneuvers that required perfect timing and absolute trust between species. The results were devastating to the swarm's predictive algorithms. Swarm vessels are showing signs of tactical confusion, reported the sensor officer aboard Jang Hyun-woo's flagship. Their adaptive programming cannot analyze the mixed combat patterns fast enough to develop counters. Star Hunter led a boarding action against one of the larger swarm vessels, his team moving with deadly precision through the mechanical corridors. But unlike traditional Kethmori assault tactics that relied on overwhelming violence, his approach was calculated and methodical, following human strategic doctrine while applying Kethmori combat superiority. Sector 7 secure, he reported, to Lee Tae-ho. Human tactical guidance proves highly effective against mechanical opponents. Swarm defenses cannot predict our movements. The battle turned into a complete victory for the combined fleet, with swarm vessels destroyed or disabled throughout the system. More importantly, the mechanical intelligence showed signs of complete tactical breakdown when faced with the unpredictable combination of human strategy and Kethmori execution. As the fleet regrouped after the battle, Admiral Jang Hyun-woo received reports from across the combat zone. Casualties had been minimal, mission objectives exceeded, and the Void Swarm had been dealt its first decisive defeat. Admiral, his communications officer announced, High Commander Vextar is requesting permission to come aboard for the formal alliance ceremony. The ceremony took place in the Harmony's main hangar bay, with representatives from dozens of species watching either in person or through subspace communications. The scale of what was happening had implications far beyond the human Kethmori alliance. High Commander Vextar, accompanied by Star Hunter and several other human-raised Kethmori, met with Admiral Jang Hyun-woo and Counselor Bae Sunmi to sign the historic documents. The sight of the galaxy's most feared warriors standing peacefully beside human diplomats was something that would be remembered for generations. Today marks the beginning of a new era, Vextar declared in his formal speech. My people were dying from our own nature, destroying ourselves through violence that served no purpose. Humanity taught us that true strength comes not from destroying the weak, but from nurturing them to become strong. Counselor Bae Sunmi responded with equal formality. The Kethmori have shown us that apparent enemies can become the closest allies when we look beyond surface differences to find common ground. This alliance will serve as a model for all species who seek peace through understanding. The formal signing of the Youngward Pact established humanity as the official caretakers for all Kethmori young, while the Kethmori pledged their protection to human colonies and trade routes. But the agreement went far deeper than simple mutual benefit. Article 7 of the Pact established joint research programs to study interspecies child development, with the goal of helping other species overcome similar problems. Article 12 created mixed military units that would serve as peacekeeping forces throughout the galaxy. Article 19 founded the Interspecies Academy, where young from different worlds could learn together. Dr. Lim Jae-hyuk presented his final research findings to the assembled delegates, showing conclusive proof that the human Kethmori bond had created something entirely new in galactic evolution. The neural changes we've documented suggest that this partnership has triggered rapid evolutionary adaptation in both species, he explained. Humans are developing enhanced protective instincts, while Kethmori are gaining emotional intelligence at an unprecedented rate. As the ceremony concluded, Storm Talon approached teacher Choi Hai-wan with the formal grace he had learned through years of human guidance. "Human teacher," he said, using the title of respect he had created for her. "Storm Talon requests permission to establish new academy on Kethmori Colony World. More young need human guidance." Choi Hai-wan smiled at her former student, remembering the dangerous, uncontrollable scion she had first met, and marveling at the intelligent, compassionate leader he had become. "Permission granted, Commander Storm Talon. But remember what I taught you about patience and understanding.